Hello, men. Good to see you. In Romans chapter 6, verses 16 through 18, the Apostle Paul speaks of slavery. He speaks of those who are slaves of sin and those who are slaves of righteousness. Well, what is Paul driving at? He's saying that for a man of God, something should have happened inside of us. Something from outside of us should have transformed something inside of us. And that something is a new heart. You know, men, people say that a leopard cannot change its spots, that we simply cannot change. And we can look around us and find many examples, maybe within us. But what is not possible for us is possible with God. Nothing is impossible for God. In the New Testament, we have a promise. And the promise comes from John's first letter, that is 3:5, 1 John 3:5, which tells us that Jesus came to take away sin. Now that, of course, has a double aspect. One is forgiveness of sin. He removes the sin from us in terms of guilt before God. That's the righteous standing that Paul has been talking about earlier in this letter. But there's also another aspect, that he can take away the dominion of sin from us. In other words, something else happens going forward where we are changed. And this came about through his fulfillment of some very important prophecy from the Old Testament. The best examples come from Ezekiel, and let me read one of those. That's from Ezekiel 36:26, where the prophecy is made by God. This is the Lord speaking. I will give you a new heart and put a new spirit within you. I will take the heart of stone out of your flesh and give you a heart of flesh. In other words, God is saying, I'm going to do a supernatural work deep inside of you. And so this is the essence of the new man, the new birth. So when someone has been born again by God after receiving forgiveness from Jesus Christ, who has come to faith, who has learned the knowledge of the gospel, the good news, has believed the good news, and is trusting in the good news, and is putting his full weight and trust in Jesus here on earth and for eternity, something happens from outside. It's hard to put into words. It's hard to describe, and only those who have had that experience know that it's happened or can even think about it. But what has happened is something's happened in the heart. And history shows this over and over again through the centuries, that you have men who were basically degenerates, and all of a sudden something changed. Something changed. What Paul would say here from these verses is that man who changed was no longer a slave of sin. He's become a slave of righteousness. And so that is something that we can rely on, especially in those times where we do feel defeated, where we have fallen short. We know we've fallen short of God's standard. We have a new heart, and part of the new heart is even feeling the conviction of our behavior. Because let's face it, men, before we made a decision for Christ, there's a lot of things we did and said where we weren't even noticing that there was anything wrong with it. And now, of course, we have conviction from the Holy Spirit, and we know different. And that's part of the new heart. Once the Spirit has put a new heart within us, it cannot be removed. This is very important. Once we have a new heart from God, a gift from God, it cannot be taken away. Romans 11:29, which we'll of course get to later in this series, tells us, "For the gifts of God cannot be revoked. They are irrevocable." What that means is once God has put a new heart inside of us, it's there. We have a new heart. We have a heart for the Lord. So once we were rebellious against God, now we're directed more towards God. It's not something we tried harder to do. It's something that supernatural came about inside of us. It says that Jesus is the author and finisher of our faith, and a new heart is certainly evidence of that. So men, my encouragement to you is trust in the Lord that he has in fact given you a new heart for him, a heart which cannot be taken away. And so until I see you again, may the Lord richly bless you, my brothers.